Now, a boy asked me, Shalom Aleichem, good morning, and I appreciate the fact that you're tuning in, and I certainly appreciate the fact that you wrote questions in. The question that I was asked was, why do Bochurim fry out? And as a Bocher myself, what can I do to help? So what I did was, I broke it down into 4 categories. Why boys struggle. Number 1, taiva. Number 2, disinterest or lack of ability to succeed. Number 3, trauma. And number 4, rebellious souls. And the last segment, I did the first 2. I want to touch on the next 2 here. When kids have experienced trauma, and it really doesn't matter where they came from the home or come from the school, there are different rules. This is becoming more and more recognized as a reality. And there's different kinds of trauma, obviously. And very, very often, children experience trauma because of their own sensitivity. In other words, 2 children go through the very same experience and have very, very different reactions to it. Because very often, the real basis for the trauma is the child's sensitivity. But the fact is, when a child is sensitive and they're traumatized, it breaks them, it crushes them. And of course, we all know the psychology of what's called suppression. Things happen when children at early ages or very early ages that they don't even have recollections of what happened, and it sits there in their subconscious, and it traumatizes them, it imprisons them. And when children are traumatized, the trauma has to be addressed first. And this involves unconditional acceptance. This is very widely discussed now, and there are people who have dedicated their whole lives to this. As parents, we want our children to be in a certain box, certain parameter. As parents, we don't want our children to embarrass us. And frankly, we can't control our children, and I've been saying this for a very long time. The job of children is to embarrass their parents. It's part of what a child does. When we have children who experience trauma, we really have to grow up as parents and appreciate that there's no box, and above all else, that it's not about us. Our child is suffering and it doesn't look good for us. It's totally immaterial. It doesn't matter at all. If we care about our child and we want our child to be able to heal from this trauma, which is a real possibility, we can't be stuck with ourselves, because our need to preserve some kind of self-identity or self-image is the antithesis of what a traumatized child needs. And oftentimes a child who's traumatized goes through a cycle where for a time they're not frum, and the role that we have in accepting them may lead that eventually they'll become frum again. But before they can become frum, they need to become a mensch. Before they become a mensch, they have to deal with the trauma. And it's our role as parents and as educators to put the child first, no matter what it cost us. Financially, emotionally, socially, in terms of how people perceive us. It becomes completely secondary to helping the child. And when the child is given space where they're able to find themselves, over time, they heal from the trauma, and when they heal from the trauma, they're able to live. And when they're able to live, they're able to be Yidden, and even Hasidim. And people who figure out how to do this correctly over the long haul, that means over the course of many years, see much nachas. But it's very hard for us to do as parents, as educators, because we want things to be right, we want things to look bad. And yeah, it's nice when things look good, but it's far more important when things are good than when things look good. And as far as the last category that I mentioned, kids who frayat because they just have big yetzaharas, angry souls. This is the hardest one to deal with. It's impossible to deal with. And it's the least likely, I would argue. It doesn't happen a lot. But there is such a concept. Our job is to educate, our job is to lead by example, our job is to support, and our job is to provide what we can. One of the many miracles of the Rebbe is the idea of miftzayim. If a person, even if it's our kid, who's not going to do all the mitzvahs, let him do 1 or 2. If we have a child that's truly rebellious, what we want is to get them to hold on to something. And in order for us to get them to hold on to something, we have to accept that this is as much as they're going to do. Because if we want it to be perfect or nothing, that's what we get, nothing. And then we've got to say a lot of Tillim. We have to have a lot of patience. And in the end, La'idach Menonidach, the Eibishter created these souls for a reason. And these souls have a very, very important mission. And oftentimes over time you see just how important the mission of these souls is. And our role is not to be happy about it, but to accept the difference between what we can do and we cannot do. And to be weary of negative emotion. In other words, being angry or being upset doesn't help. It's destructive. And in the end, it's in the Eibishter's hands. In the end, it's in the Eibishter's hands. Now this Bocher, why do Bochurim fry out? And as a Bocher myself, what can I do to help? Asked me a very different question than the one I just answered. I just gave you 3 segments and why Bochurim fry out, and I offered you solutions. That's not what the Bocher asked me. The Bocher says, what should I do? What should I do? What should I do as a Bocher? What you should do as a Bocher is be a good Bocher. And the beginning of that is being Mesuder, being organized, going to sleep at night and getting up in the morning and working hard all day and being consistent in what you do, being a living example of what a good boy is, and helping as much as you can. The Rebbe believes that we're living in a time where as much as you do to help another person, it's not enough. But as a Bocher, it's very, very important that when you're involved with Bochurim who are weaker, you're lifting them and they're not dragging you down. Which means when they start discussing things that are not appropriate for a Bocher, do not listen in the name of Kiruv. Explain to them these things you don't want to hear. I think the most important thing we can do for a friend of ours who's frying out is not drop them. Remain their friend under all conditions. In other words, when the friendship is conditional and they change from how we are or we expect them to be, the friendship stops. And nobody is benefited by that. But if the friendship is unconditional, that means we love them without any rules, any parameters. So, staying in touch with that person, which may feel like a waste of time, because right now nothing positive is coming from the fact that I'm staying in touch with them, in the end bears fruit over time. Sometimes over years, you start a chavrusa. You start getting involved with one another's lives as you get older. And ultimately, what friends can do for one another in terms of being makar of each other is extraordinary. If we stay in the game, if we remain involved with our friends, but we have to remember that we're in a mashpia role. We have to remember that we help them by helping ourselves. And then we all need God's help. We say a kapitel tilim, a 2 kapitlach tilim, a 10 kapitlach tilim, or 100 kapitlach tilim, or 1,000 kapitlach tilim. And we do what we can. We accept what we cannot. And we stay involved with the people in our lives who don't exactly conform to the model that we thought they should conform. And in the end, they also have a Yiddish neshama, and that Yiddish neshama will come forward unless we push it away.